Call on members' order of the day number 2.
Education, Restoration of Democracy to University Councils Amendment Bill, first reading.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Education, Restoration of Democracy to University Councils Amendment Bill be read a first time. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the bill be referred to the Education and Science Select Committee. Mr Speaker, in 2015, the current National Government amended the Education Act 1989, repealed the requirement for democratic elections and student representatives on tertiary institution councils. Removing democratic representation from university councils was plainly wrong. It undermines the integrity of our public institutions and it sends the wrong signal to the next generation of Kiwi leaders and the many thousands of hard-working academic and general university staff. The Education, Restoration of Democracy to University Councils Amendment Bill would ensure mandatory staff and student representation on university councils and would limit ministerial appointees to 4. It has the widespread support of the tertiary education sector, with key stakeholders such as the New Zealand University Students Association, the Tertiary Education Union and Universities New Zealand on record as calling on all parties to find a workable solution forward and thus to allow this bill to Select Committee for a fair and robust debate. Mr Speaker, the first reading of this bill comes at a time when the need for good governance in our tertiary institutions has never been more apparent. National's mismanagement of the sector is plain for all to see. Instead of treating education as essential public good, which it is, Minister Joyce treats it as nothing more than a factory or a cash cow for private tertiary providers to milk dry the international student market. On budget day, Minister Joyce announced phantom funding that was exposed by Labor to be yet another year of real cuts, another national vanishing act, another brick in the wall of unfulfilled promises. Mr Speaker, National's been underfunding tertiary education for years. Just ask the lecturers, the administrators, the cleaners at our tertiary institutions who are being asked to do more with less. And we know that that means more work for less pay. New Zealand now ranks near the bottom of the OECD on tertiary education spending per student, behind Australia, behind Canada, Denmark, Ireland, Finland, France, Germany and Israel, and well below the OECD average. Under National, total spending's fallen from around $3.2 billion a year to only $3 billion today, and it's an embarrassment that New Zealand's going backwards. No wonder that our university rankings are on the slide. Victoria University dropped by at least 50 places, and Canterbury and Waikato both plummeted more than 100 places in global rankings this year. To make matters worse for university researchers, New Zealand invests only half the average of R&D of the OECD countries. The result is a wave of mergers and cuts and an increasing reliance on foreign students. That's the context of this bill, sir. The same time as he's been effectively starving the tertiary sector and selling short our children's future, Minister Joyce has been hard at work stifling the democratic voice of students. National's 2011 Voluntary Student Membership Act was an ideological diatribe that scrapped students' Universal Association membership, limited students' association, and leaving them dependent upon the institutions that they were supposed to robustly represent the interests of their members too. Student associations are on such thin ice that the New Zealand University Students Association has been in danger of folding, with just 10 members left after major institutions such as Canterbury and Waikato pulled out several years ago. Unless turned around because they couldn't afford it, Mr Bishop, unless turned around, this could force that Students' Association to fold after 86 years. And worse, sir, in the polytech sector, many institutions lack any student body at all, like Aoraki Polytechnic. or their student bodies like at Wairiki, where Mr Tabato once worked, are under such pressure that their voice is routinely and systematically stifled. Mr Speaker, a strong campaign by staff and students saw democracy restored to Victoria University with 2 members on the University Council. That's essentially what this bill seeks to do nationwide. While all this has been going on, Minister Joyce and National have been building up a private tertiary fiefdom that is akin to the Wild West, with loose standards and weak oversight being the order of the day. And as the government doubles down, sir, on bad governance and chases the international student dollar, it's effectively a free-for-all where numbers are inflated, tutors enrolled in courses, and some $50 million has been overpaid to institutions in the last year. Mr Speaker, on the substance of this bill, the silencing of students at staff on university councils directly undermines their role as a critic and conscience in society. They are crucial and legitimate stakeholders in how universities and other tertiary institutions work, and their voices deserve to be heard. Including their voices in law on every council also assists the institution. Information can flow both ways, and feedback and opinion can be properly channeled. It creates value for both sides. This is the modern networked world in the information age, sharing information, aligning interests, building a positive community of support works well for the institutions, well for the students, and well for the staff. That is why, sir, it's time in this bill to move beyond ideology. It's time to find a workable compromise, a new way forward, one that engages students, one that engages staff, unions, management, and of course the Crown, one that ensures both good governance and strong representation, and thus creates shared value for all stakeholders. Rather than getting lost in a war of words or an outdated market ideology that treats higher learning institutions as factories, staff as machines, and students as commodities. Mr Speaker, to conclude, it is apparent that the integrity of our public institutions has been under constant attack by this government, and in particular by the Minister for Tertiary Education, who seems to relate it to an outdated business with no respect for staff or students. So this bill will provide a pathway through a select committee process that will reverse the government's attempts to stifle democracy at universities and allow for a wider debate about the commercialisation of education by the current government. Proper representation also matters to the critic and conscience role of universities and other tertiary institutions. Principles of good governance demand representation of all parties, of students, of staff, of governors. Supporting this bill would allow all the issues to be aired and new solutions found at our public institutions. And I want to signal, sir, that the Labor Party is open to extending the scope of the bill to include wānanga and polytechnics as well as universities, and the draft has been cleared by both the Office of the Clerk and the Bill of Rights vet to allow that amendment to happen at Select Committee. Sir, also, the Labor Party wishes to signal its willingness to cooperate with the government and with all parties around the House to amend the bill significantly if necessary to find an enduring, positive and relatively apolitical way forward, where the government's partial aim, to give them some credit perhaps, which is to ensure business-like governance, is matched by the legitimate need to have democratic representation on university, polytech and wānanga councils. Mr Speaker, we're keen to work with all parties, and we ask the House to send this bill to a select committee so that the views of the sector and core stakeholders can be properly heard. And if the government across the aisle has nothing to be afraid of from allowing that process to go on, I hope that they too will support this opportunity for a refresh of the current law. Because in the end, sir, ideas cannot be suppressed by law. Democracy will flourish despite the jackboot of the temporarily powerful, and progressive ideals will continue to inform this beautiful but fragile country
The member's
of
time has
ours.
expired.